Hi, my name is Benedict. This is the last video that I'm planning to do for the Making Drums series. So we'll finalise by taking a drum pattern and actually looking at ways we might mix that. Because it doesn't matter how great your pattern is, if you mix it funny, it's not going to work in the piece. Now remember, as I'm always pushing, this is about the piece, the big picture here. It's not about saying, I want my drums to be grand, and there's some other shit going on too, because otherwise drum patterns are a dime a dozen. Pieces of music are where it can be unique, where you can put out your vision. Now this isn't a great piece of music, but anybody who's familiar with me will go, yeah, I can smell Benedict in that, and that's part of my vision. Whether you like it or not, shouldn't be part of this. This is a tutorial. If I had the opportunity for free to go and sit with somebody whose music I don't love, let's say the Deadmau5 guy who's doing master classes, if he said, hey Benedict, come sit in my class, I'd go sit in his class. Wouldn't be because, oh wow, I want to learn how to be Deadmau5. If Vangelis said to me, hey Benedict, I want you to come sit in my class, same with Alan Parsons, I'd be like, yeah. But it doesn't mean that the information necessarily is more or less valid. So let's look at where we're at. I have started with the pattern as we left it in the last video on sort of creating patterns and groove, and I've added a few more components, so I've got all of our sounds used, because where I ended up yesterday with my horrible headache, I didn't have all the sounds used, and I thought, well, I've made them, we need to put them in. If we're going to do a mix, a more complex mix, we need to have all these sounds, so I've put them in. So now, I have deliberately demixed these drums. Before, when we were playing with them, I had naturally made some effort to balance up the levels. To make this a bit more appropriate as a mix thing, I said, okay, let's demix them all. One of the advantages of demixing after you have written something is that it separates you from the idea that you thought you had. So listening to that, we've got a somewhat different feel coming out of that drum kit than what we had before. Before it was a sort of 80s rock kind of thing. Now it almost sounds more like a CR78 kind of thing. Is that where I want to end up? I'm unsure. I'm going to let this guide us. But if you're thinking, gee, that sounds different, yes it does, because I've demixed it. Because A, it gives us a better idea of what I'm going to do, because you get to see everything happen from the beginning up. B, as I just said, if you demix something, then it might give you a different idea of what that's really trying to be. So what I would normally do at this point is I would be listening to, well, what are the parts I've got of my music. Again, everything's deliberately demixed. This is a bit more like if I'd been sent this. If you sent me this piece of music, I would go through and have a listen to it like this. My funky bass line. It says I've got a pad. And an arpeggio. Obviously, the role of this arpeggio is just to fill in some space. Now, I considered just doing this with nothing but the drums and the bass, or even just nothing but the drums, but you wouldn't learn a lot. Because remember, these drums, or this drum and bass rhythm pattern, have got to exist inside a piece. It's just going to be so much easier if we've got a little bit of stuff happening, Plus, it's just so much easier when we're going to hear this go round and round to at least have some kind of melodic movement, so it's not just like, oh, I'm going crazy by the second. So, that's what we've got. We don't need that anymore. That's cast in stone. It's done. It is locked away. Looking at the Mixerini, which is a little harder seeing my head's in the way. Let me just move my head. There you go, head. I may have to move my head a couple of times in this. There we go. You can see Mr. Mixerini. Of course, being me, everything's exactly where it was. Nothing's been done to the gains. Nothing has been done anywhere. So this is a straight level mix. Nothing to see here, kiddies. Let's kill this. Here's what we've got. I've got nothing happening over here. All that should ever be happening at this point in time in your masters is just something to stop you from blowing the levels. That's it. I have taken my COM kit, which you've seen me develop over the last few episodes here, a few days as well, and I've separated things out. It's nothing to do with telling you how to run your door. That's your thing. But I've separated out so each sound is now able to be processed separately. I will say up front, this is a rare thing for me to do, and I'm doing it more for your benefit than this being the way that I would do things. Normally, I would start by saying, let's process that whole kit as one. But we're going to get to that stage just a little bit further down the track because, and I was meant to show you this, kill that, back to Mr. Mixerini, all our drums are summed to a drum bus. So everything that happens in drumland plays on its individual channel, is summed to the drums. From there, the drums and bass are also summed together into the rhythm bus. Hence why if you're looking at this, you go, it's happening in lots of places. Simply gives me the most amount of control. If I decide that I want to process these as a pair, it's already done. The other sounds are left separate because we're not going to focus on them too much, merely just to make the mix around them. So bye bye Mr. Mixerini and sequencer. I said bye bye. Okay, here we go. So I know you all want to start with the drums, so we'll start with the drums. So we will mute our bass, our pad, and our arpeggio. So we just be. So let's work from the bottom up. Not necessarily the way that I recommend doing it. Normally, I would say let's have our piece basically mixed. So I'd have my pads and my arpeggios mixed, how I want them to feel. Then I would start looking at the kit. And as I said, normally I would look at the kit as a whole. But I know you want me to work through separately, so that is what I will do for you. So we want to process this. The most obvious thing that we're probably going to reach for is a compressor. Now you will note that I'm not going to be soloing this sound. Tempting to say, let's make our kick solely in solo. It's a bit duplicative. But the problem with doing that is that we'll make a sound that sounds great, but then it's got no reference to the rest of the kit, let alone the mix. So we're not doing that. This could definitely use some more presence. It's a fairly bright kind of kick. So I'm looking for there, if you've watched my earlier tutorials on mixing, what I'm looking for there is the point where that kick really punches through. Because there's a bit happening in this mix, I'm not looking to make a great big fat long kick. We could, but we're looking for punch. Just that way that it can push through the mix. So we focused on finding the attack. Where's that real punch come through? I've lengthened the release quite a lot more than you might otherwise think that I need to do. Like I could have left it quite short, but I've lengthened it because you hear there are points where there are two kicks close together. Now I want that compressor in this situation not to have fully recovered for the second kick. That just influences our groove a little bit. Deliberate decision. Rough, well that says 9.5, but a rough somewhere around 8:1 ratio, because that's an aggressive drum kind of a thing. It's all going to depend on what you're doing, but with individual drum sounds you can go fairly aggressively so long as they're not happening too fast. So we can hear we've got a lot more kick happening there. Okay, I'm happy with that. What, if anything, do we want to do to EQ this fella? I'm a little cautious at the moment about it, but it's not got a lot of bass in it, and I know that our bass isn't super bassy either, and nor are we likely to want our bass to be super bassy because it's a little bit fast at times, so there isn't that ability to go boom that you might do with a slow precision bass or an 808 bass type thing, which is that time allows it to seem really bassy. Because this has got, it moves a little bit fast at times, therefore we may not have that speaking as much in the real lows, in which case let's give this a chance to have a little bit more welly. We may lose it later, but we'll give it a chance. Now we've got to watch our levels here, we're starting to get a little out of control. So I might move that before. Okay. That should do for now. I've given it a little bit more cut. Snare. Snares are harder to work until we've gotten a sense of what they need to do. Okay, I know for a fact that cymbal has to come back down quite a long way. And the clave. Okay, that gives me a little bit more headroom, so that's good. So what do I want to do to this? Let's just try a little bit of reverb to start with. I really like to listen to my reverbs before I start applying them, because that way I get a sense of, okay, this is what I'm adding to this sound, rather than sort of stumbling around going, oh, you can actually hear what the reverb's going to be. You know after a while how that's likely to start to balance up. I don't necessarily want this to be too long, because I've got a room or a mix reverb that I'm going to add later, which I know is fairly large. I can look at gates. Okay, I'm happy with that. So we've got a bit of reverb, but it chops off. It doesn't last forever, so that's kind of good. Let's see if there's anything that really wants to come out in the EQ on this fella. That's nice. As I've warned before, be careful about putting a lot of treble or air, particularly on things like snares, because you can fight with your hi-hats, and if you've got another device that needs to use air. Most commonly vocals or lead lines, and then of course things like strings where you want them to seem really airy. Also, when you come to your master, if you're going to put a smiley face EQ on your master, and you've already put a smiley face EQ on every other sound, you've now double smiley faced them, which can be a little extreme, Joker extreme. Happy enough with that. Hi-hats. This is going to some extent depend on how we were thinking of processing this whole piece, as in what kind of effects, if any, am I going to put on these things. A little bit of phaser, just to make them move around. Notice it does change the tone of them. So I might want to, and just to be neat, because I like to be neat, I'll pop on one of these and see what we might do with a little bit of EQ. I think that's going to work nicely. Bongos. Now to help me to know what I'm listening to, remember you can just hit your solo momentarily. I'm not going to work in solo, because that way I'm going to make the coolest sounding bongo ever, and then when I drop them out realize, shit, this doesn't match the rest of my drum mix. Waste of time. So what might I want to do to these guys? I think I might want to do something a little bit interesting. So, thinking cap on, let's try this. This guy's a wonderful developer. He makes amazing stuff. I know that's me. Let's just keep him open. I may well want to undo that later. I am not going to weld myself to that idea. But I kind of like it. We've introduced a few overtones, gives it a little bit more of a hand drum sound rather than just a couple of sine waves, and it pulls the two of those together. And it's given them a little bit more character in the mix. Tom's is. Equivalent to soloing, just playing them, sort of getting a sense of what I want to do to these things. No, I don't want to do that, but that gives me a very quick way of checking what do I want to do with stereo on these fellas. So the lower one will pop over to the left, I guess. Let's give that a go. Ooh, nice and dramatic. Now I'm going to go with trying a delay. I'll go milliseconds because I want to be in control of this. I don't want to BPM it. You have to fly in an LFO in the case of this guy. I want to have a little bit of EQ processing on this. When what are you at? So I'm just using, depending on the DAW you're using as to how you might achieve this in Reason, some devices will have a send and return built inside them. One of the great things about the Reason rack. So now I use a different feedback. Oh. So each time it's passing through this EQ, it's being modified. Again, I'm not allowing myself to feel wedded to that, because once we get this in a mix, a proper mix, it may fall to pieces. Remember, normally I'd be working from my proper mix back into my drums. Tom's done my clave, which is a cowbelly kind of sound. I did modify it slightly for this pattern. Let's just be simple and look at an EQ. Actually, no, let's not just be simple and look at an EQ. Explaining myself, came into this knowing that I wanted this sound to have more character, more bite, more character. I didn't want to go straight to an overdrive. It is possible going to an overdrive or a resonator. There's a good thought. Resonator. Kilohertz, resonator, or the resonating of. Where is it? Oh, hello. I feel like Patrick Cowley already. It's given it a lot more character. So I can actually, in effect, pull that further back in the mix if I want to, but because it's got character, it stands forward. So if I'm wanting it to be dominant, and your bell pattern in Latin is quite dominant, giving it that extra character allows me to have a lot more play in what I do with that. Simple. Where is it? Ah, there it is. Alright, I'd quarter on a part. I showed you how you could create a simple choke just by changing the decay time. So I'd managed to stop it right on one of those choke points. These are a funny one, and it may well require some fixing once we've got it in the mix. I can look at putting more drive on, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be doing great things if I do that. They weren't exactly planning cymbals when they built this device. So I don't blame them for the fact that it doesn't. Okay. Again, not going to wed myself to that, but just sort of see how we go in the mix. Too bright. I think I'm happy enough with that for now. Remember, I'm only looking at that on its own, so now we need to pull back in our base. First problem we've got is it's way too loud. Now we can attack this one in two ways, and I'll show you both ways and we'll work out what balances, where it balances. The most obvious thing that we're going to do is whack a compressor on this fella. Is it a good idea? Let's see. Remember again, what I'm looking for here is groove. More than anything else, because I don't need to control levels on this. I'm not looking at level control, I'm looking at transient control. Volume over time, therefore groove control. So I'm looking for that. How do we get this to sort of do that? Okay, it's giving it a little bit more, so that's winning. The next thing we're wanting to look at is our bus. So this bus is all our drums and our bass together. We had our drums together, now we've got our drums and bass together. I'll try and remember to come back to drums together in a moment. Actually, no, let's have a look at drums together first. Sorry, I've changed my mind. Trying to be as comprehensive as I can for you. So let's shut him down for now. So, totally slaved. That's the point here. We're looking for how it grooves. Go out for a really long attack. That in effect is the sound goodizer that people refer to with the SSL master bus compressor, which is up there. Thing up here on the mixer, that's the slow attack, the fast release, and this is set to nuke. Here how overall it just makes everything else kind of woo. So not a bad place to look for things to do. It's a bit like a tape. Don't think we're looking for an ability to crush this, but hear how that's really bringing out the snare. It's kind of killing the kick drum, but if we wanted a snare heavy mix with that 80s sound, that's a thing we could do to it. Like we could take our, let's say for a moment we do like that snare sound, and who doesn't? Then we could say here, I hear that, I like it, I don't like it what it does to the rest of everything else. So let's take some of that. The long release that forces that through. We've got quite a bit of this and a fairly low threshold, so we'll bypass that. Here how we've really changed our mix here, and the how the gate sounds. Okay. Now we're sounding tremendously overprocessed. I think we might go back out here. Pushing this not to try and make it louder, because I know we've got some issues up here, just so that I can get control over what's happening over here. So look at the crest factor here is actually quite huge. So we're still letting all our transients through. Because we've got such a huge amount of transient, and I'm not convinced that we're going to want to keep that in the end, then let's just put ourselves in the ultimate amount of control over it, which is going to be with a limiter. So that allows us to drive control that just a little bit. I mean, we can be excitable if we want. But you can hear the problem that we're developing with our kick drum, that it's starting to get a tone, which we don't really want. So we can look at, now remember, everything that we do here is cumulative. So any EQs or compressions that I do here and do again, so I've got a bug on my glasses, becomes cumulative here. So we compress and then we compress again. So if we add a 2 to 1 and a 2 to 1, we've got a 4 to 1 or worse. So if you like what it's doing to the kit overall, but you hear one of the sounds starting to degrade, then we've got the issue that we've got here. We've made it sound nice on its own, but the problem is that there's just too much processing. So where's that kick? So bypassed. Good one. Let's see. Okay, so now that's within the context of our drum mix. We've now got things behaving better. If you think that snare's a little much, which it might be, so it's letting that kick through better. We're looking for crispness and clarity. We're not looking for whoop, whoop, whoop. We're looking for crispness and clarity. Because what's crisp and clear is heard and pulled forward. What's whoop, whoop, whoop might sound impressive, but it's not brought forward. Matter of fact, it can push back in the mix. So let's now listen to this bass. And see what we might do to pull this and the drums together. I'm going to try this. I think it's going to be wrong, but I'm going to try it anyway. Definitely pulls it into the one space. It's doing more damage than it needs. Okay, so we've put that into one space. We have degraded the sound to some extent. So if we were saying, oh, I've got my pristine jazz drum kit and my pristine Fender Precision bass, oh, now we've probably messed them up. But I don't have pristine anything here. So it really comes down to, how do I get them sounding like they're one thing? That's one way of doing it. We could equally have grabbed the old soft tube saturation knob and it's probably kind. Like I said, I didn't expect Scream to work, but it's worth a go. And the major problem with the saturation knob is that as you turn it up, it sounds better because it gets louder. And that's kind of like for soft tube, you're like, I think you did this deliberately to us. That they should make some sort of attempt, give us another button on the other side, so as this goes up 6 dB, that they roll something like 6 dB off the other side. It's a bit unfair because it sounds better. it's a bit line ball on these. This probably still sounds a bit more open, so I'm gonna let this one have the sway. I'm aware that it's toying with us in terms of that. I know I'm adding lots of layers of compression here, and it's not necessarily wise, but I'm trying to show you how these things are going to interact together. And if you were going to have a process heavy mix, these are the sorts of things that you can end up doing. You've then got to work out how to balance each layer. As you see, I've already rebalanced with my kick and my snare and the other elements as well, but particularly with those as I've added a different layer of compression. Looking to see there, can we glue them together a little bit more? Obviously that's overkill. We don't want to do a lot. You can even get right down into very tiny ratios here. All you're looking to do is just create the sense that they all move together. I'm going to call that okay. Again, I'm making sure that I'm not wedded to it. We've got a pad. Quickly look at that. Because now I'm moving into obviously looking at the mix as a whole. I'm not going to do much processing to these individually because that's not what this is about. I've got them there. Let's look at our separate parts. Take that off. Tempting to take all of this just below the fundamental, but you're actually hearing a lot of the stuff underneath and that sort of low air. And you can get rid of it, and sometimes it's good to get rid of it. But in that snare, it's an interrupt sound. You get rid of the low air, it sounds thin. That stuff down here probably has no great advantage. If we didn't have much else happening there, then we might even decide to boost that low air. It's going to make that sound really woomphy without having a lot of mess going on there. Hi-hats. There's nothing down below, no drama. I'm creatively changing that sound. It's my sound, I got the right. now I'm looking to bass, so to balance the drums and bass in terms of where they're dominant in the low end. I'm going to do this on the whole kit rather than just in the second kick drum. I've got a slight dilemma in that in these cans I can't hear bass properly at all. They're super clear, far too clear, and then the bass is accurate, but I can't hear what it's behaving like if I were hearing it on my hands in vision on my proper loudspeakers. Lack of air between here and there means that I'm not confident. But for the moment, I've said let's try having the drum down there. It does work nicely with that kick drum and the bass a little higher. You might think, oh, but don't you want the bass like nice and low? Yes, I can hear it's nice and low and it sounds brilliant. But I think once we get into air, and particularly once I get into a sub in air on my lounge room stereo, I think we're going to have some issues with it. Plus I know, as I've said before, I can pull the first harmonic, push that through a little bit more, and I'm going to end up with the appearance of a stronger bass. So I'd rather go that way based on what I'm hearing at the moment. Let's look at the whole rhythm bus together. Just trying to get a sense of how can we overall make it move. I don't want to make big moves here, but we're just overall looking to say, okay, if we EQ this as one, our bass and all our drums as one, we just gel them that little bit more. Happy to do that. A pad. It sounds pretty to boost it up higher, but the concern there is that we're focusing more on let's make that sound pretty than let's put it in the piece. I think that giving it body, because it's the center of this piece, is probably the right way to go. The arpeggio. So I got this little thing that goes with it. Where'd it go? Sounds like it disappeared. Oh, it's still there. Let's just make sure. So I'm taking something unique about that, the role that it plays. Now I can either have my string high and focus my arpeggio in the middle, or I can try what I've done, let my pad string be, firmer in the middle and let the arpeggio sit on top. There's no right or wrong answer. It comes down to what they need to do. May just be the amount of time I've been listening to, started to get a little tired of the intense gated snare. Normally we shouldn't be looking to do necessarily everything that I'm doing in one spot here, and especially with such a short piece with no variety, you get very tired of it. It's definitely given the snare a greater sense of air. You do lose a sense of air when you gate it and compress and bake that reverb in like that. So it's given it more air. Happy with that. I think I'm about happy. I've come this far, so we've kept our mix well within here. So that's right. We're not relying on hearing our mix be pinned to a limiter or anything. Tempting to do this. You can hear how it's suffering really badly already. So. Because of what I'm hearing, I would not want to master this too hard, because there is a sense of space inside this, especially with that snare. Maybe the cymbal's a bit enthusiastic. Yeah, probably was. Here we go. That's done. Actually, no, I totally forgot something. There were two things I wanted to go through. So we'll back off for the moment. We'll go through these two things. One I said I was going to do. Actually, both I said I was going to do. And it's not right for me to forget about those things. I'm going to show you doing some things that you probably wouldn't do. But I will. Because I commonly do them. So I think it's kind of good for you to see these things done because they show you different things that you can do. And do them to the whole drum mix, which is part of why you probably think, oh geez, that's a little bit different. Let's go. You saw me do this with the hats before. Sounds a bit extreme, and it does not suit this mix. Does not suit this mix, or at least not what I think is happening here. But see here, you get quite an interesting sound. So there are quite a few things that you can do to a whole track and end up with very interesting results. Phasers, flanges, you've heard that's very, very sort of similar. And then where is it? Sonic Charge. This guy ends up on my drums a lot. Now remember, my drums don't normally play as much of a dominant role as they do in this piece. Mine are normally a little timekeeper that adds a little bit more roll. You're wanting to lift your drums out of that. I don't know, many of you think, Benedict, you're mental, why would anyone want to do that? Let's say, for example, you're running two drum mixes at the same time. Visage's Fade to Grey, Phil Collins in the Air Tonight. There are quite a lot of situations where there are two drum patterns, two drum mixes running at once. One of them, you don't want both of them being in a boom, boom, boom arena, or you're screwed. So one of them you can be boom, and the other one you're going to be blip, 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 blip. So the two pair up very nicely. This is a way of doing that. Flanges so you can mess around with pitch. Not the best on this, definitely not right in this mix. Just because the compression that we've got running in this mix already, which I don't want to undo, was making those sounds seem longer. You can use this device to stereoize your drums. I don't think it's a good idea. but you can do it if you want. You can also use, and this guy's great for this, really short delays. It's a kind of reverb. With a flancher rolled in at the same time. So if you want to lighten up a whole kit, let's put this back in the mix. Very centered, which was the idea here. It's now lifted that kit in a little bit of a way. We can, of course, do things like so if you've got parts of a drum mix that when you get there you go, I am not loving what's happening with this, then you can do things like what you've just seen me do. You can take your... this is not a pitch shifter but a frequency shifter. A pitch shifter would just say, okay, I'm going to take everything and move it as it is, just as you expect, as moving from C to D. A frequency shifter takes all those frequencies and shifts them, but it doesn't keep them in the same order in which they were. So between your fundamental and your first harmonic, you've got an octave. If you use a pitch shifter, you've still got an octave as you move from C to D. With a frequency shifter, as you move the frequency up, so effectively as you move from C to D, your overtone, your first harmonic, is no longer on D. The fundamental may have moved to D, but your harmonic has not. Exactly what the rules are, I don't know. So I don't know whether it means that the harmonic gets shorter, like the distance gets shorter, so let's say it goes C to B or something, from C to D, and then it goes from C to B. I don't know what that does, or whether it goes higher, but the thing is, it's kind of not linear in the same way, so you end up with that funny kind of sound. And you can use that. Also with pitch shifters is that they're very laggy. This thing ain't. So if we wanted to shift our snare, particularly with samples, it's given that snare a little bit of a lift. Something you can't do with EQ, you can't do with pitch shifting. The snare is fundamentally the same, but it's given it that little bit of a lift. You can look at mixing, but you are going to get phase problems. Too creative. What we're doing there is just basically adding a ring modulator. I'll show you that on the whole mix. But this was definitely nice, where we just added because it's a synth or a sample, that snare's always the same. It's hard to build in differences. Yes, you can look at round robins and this, that, and the other, but it's never the same. So one thing we can look at doing, and this is useful in this situation because a snare is quite samey, and I didn't build in any difference at all. It was absolutely fine to be that way. But within the mix, to make it a little less rigid, we can actually take an LFO, it can be pretty slow, and effectively move our tuning up and down a bit. We want to be subtle with it. There we go. I like that. So we've added something of value. Another thing that I will commonly do to my mixes, which I was going to show you before, but then sidetracked myself, easy done, is I will use this in a ring modulator mode. I've already used my own ring modulator before. This guy is cool for this. Not suited to this track. But for my own kind of drums can work really, really nicely if we put this up before our compressor. We start to really weird character things that you probably wouldn't think to do to drums, but when you get the balance right, when you get your tuning right, it can actually sound really great and you kind of don't notice it. Depends on the kind of music you're doing and the mix application. But for myself, those sorts of things work a treat. Few if you are making a Storm and EDM track, as I say, you're probably not going to want to do that to your main drum line. But if you're looking to run a second drum line, that sort of stuff is absolutely brilliant. You've suddenly created this real character line rather than two sets of drums that are trying to be the same thing at once. The other thing was, close that down, back to the old mixer. At the moment, our thing has no reverb, except for on that arpeggio. So let's go and look at reverb. I've got one. I'll just show you. Here's one I built earlier in Ascend. Quick look. It's using a delay that has an internal tap out, just like I showed you before with the jiggery-pokery delay. That tap sends the delay to this reverb, which then runs through another delay and a chorus. EQ is there in case I suddenly find that I've got a frequency that wants to feed back. So I can just notch that back out again. And that runs through. This is fairly short. This sort of thing works really well for very long blooming reverbs that you want to sound really soft and washy. Better to use, in this case, the cross feedback, because we can have our left and right times separate. This fella's going to actually pull them into mono anyway with your reverb, and if you cross, that means the left's going to the right's going to the left, so you effectively monoize because if you make your reverb too stereo, it's problem city. Unless you're looking for it, it's problem city. So we're going to a reverb. Just now, this has a reverb already baked in. Hi-hat. We're not hearing that. Let's try this with the... Okay, there we go. Again, it's entirely possible I'll get the reverb mix wrong with these cursor things. Just so you can hear what I've made in the reverb. We would start, because this is a drum mix, therefore our drum kit would be in the one room. And you still want that thinking, even if you've pulled in samples from all kinds of places. Our drums in the one room. All I'm looking for there is just enough wetness on them to pull them together and give them that little bit more space, sparkle and air. Don't want too much, but it's entirely possible that I may want to put some more on the snare, but it may have enough already because it's got its own reverb built in. This bass want. No, but I'll still give it a little tiny bit, something that you don't really hear at all. Tempting to say I'll make it dry, and it's legitimate to make it dry, but when you leave it completely dry, because remember that bass has no effects on it at all, when you leave it really dry, it's going to push really forward in the mix. So it's worth putting a little bit on just to put it in that environment and help settle it back so you don't have a really in-your-face kind of a mix. If it were purely me and I was putting the time, I'd probably have another reverb or some extra delays. I've got a delay on that pad sound, but I'd probably go for a little bit more, but that'll do. Let's get ourselves into the right part of the sequence. There we are. So that little bit of reverb has made everything seem warmer and more cohesive. That's all we needed to do. We can just check our overall levels because we kind of messed that up. Okay, I think I'm going to call that. So we're calling not only this little mix, but we're calling the series, unless somebody has a compelling question that I need to make a follow-up on. We've covered making kick drums and all the elements of it, which is the bit that we hit, the skin, which resonates and creates a tone. That then resonates inside the tub that it's in, which is the shell of the drum. There may be a second skin as well, which will create another tone. And then, of course, any overtones that are created from that, and the beater itself, the sound of the beater itself. So that's in kick drums. In snare drums, the snare adds commonly a snare, which is a pile of bits of metal garbage underneath the second skin, and they vibrate. It takes time for them to start. So you've normally got the crack of the drum, and then the noise grows a little bit after that. Bongos and hand drums, huge amount of variety there. Tune them to suit your mix, unless of course you're recording, and then you probably aren't going to be doing some of the stuff I'm doing there, but I'm making them, so I'm adding overtones as is necessary. Not always great to add a lot of overtones into bongos, hand drum kind of things. They'll be there. Subtlety is the key. Toms, again, depending on whether you want a subtle sound or a great big sound. If you are looking for something that really cuts the mix and sounds huge, that Simmons sound is actually more like a kick drum. We've got emphasis on the beater, so you put your noise right on the beginning and your tone is a little slower to develop. So you actually get something that rips straight through the mix and then has a whoop afterwards as that tone grows. How you make those is going to vary. Just be cautious you don't make them sound too much like snares, because if you use the snare method for them, they'll just sound like weird snares. Why have you got 4 snares in your drum kit? It's just weird. Hi-hats are commonly fundamentally noise. They can be built from pulse waves. If you do a lot of messing around with pulse waves, you can make very cool hi-hats. You might want a little bit of EQ. You can also apply noise LFOs or really fast LFOs of say like a square wave or a pulse wave to a pulse and get some really interesting sounds. But they're going to be character sounds. They're not going to immediately sound like samples. But knowing what the elements are and how they get there. Remember, you've got a dinner plate made of tin. You've got a closed one, an open one. You can have variants of openness in between, and then you're looking at where am I hitting that right on the edge in the bell. Is it closed? Is it open? All of that. Don't necessarily think, oh, they're always going to be on the top. A lot of classic 70s records, the hi-hats are quite low in tone, so that they're not fighting with the air. If you're writing house music, yeah, put them right up the top. Cymbals really are a variant of. They're a bigger dinner plate made of tin, and very much you're looking at where is it being hit. Is it being hit on the edge? In which case, ting, and then you've got a lot of time as your sound develops. So you could be opening the color of your noise. You can have, like I suggested for hi-hats, LFOs driving a particular source sound and open and close that as the dinner plate gets hit and gets more and more excited and then starts to settle. As you see me use, overdrive can actually be a great way of putting that together and really emphasizing what's happening inside those sounds. And then just strange little percussive noises, side sticks, claves, cowbells, any of those weird wacky sounds that you might find in a percussion set, or just little zap sounds and weird electronic-y noises. Each one of those is a character, make them as you see fit. Short is often better, and focus on subtlety so that you can have many working together in a mix if you want that really busy kind of sound. Or you can have them just be ridiculously bright, as in you can make them all out of square waves, and that's the da da da, you don't love me, don't love you, you don't love me kind of sound. You can't use too many sounds in a drum mix when they're like that. But it's kind of a bit of an all or nothing there, so go subtly or just go over the top for a character sound, but you can't run too many sounds that way. We put them together, we create our groove for how our sounds interact with each other. Say that again, we create our groove with how our sounds interact. All our elements. Notice how the drums sound one way on their own. When we add the bass line, the groove changes. When we then added our strings and arpeggio, they change again. So if you have our other percussive or elements in the mix that have layers of percussiveness, like pianos or guitars, then they become part of your overall groove. You can play with that by playing with things like swings or using groovers. So you can create a MIDI pattern and say, look, I want all my snares late, or all of that particular point late, or whatever. You can also play with slop by making all your players a little sloppy. You can end up with some MIDI dramas there, but that's nobody's fault, it's the nature of MIDI. But nonetheless, play with those, find a point where the piece seems to feel natural and just sort of settle into like, oh wow, that's great. Doesn't matter whether we're looking at incredibly electronic stuff or us trying to recreate jazz players, which I think is a dumb idea. But nonetheless, either way, find that point where it settles into going, yeah, I feel authentic. Not authentic as in I sound just like a jazz player, but within the context of that piece, it feels authentic, and then you've most likely found your groove. Mix them. You've seen me mix each sound and process each sound individually here. That's not my normal method. My normal method would be to go straight to mixing all the drums together. Then if I hear a sound and I'm going, yeah, I want to fix that or make more of that, then I'll look at breaking that out. My policy is not to create work that I probably don't need. My policy is to get the most result with the least amount of work done. That way you're staying purer to the message. And mixing is never the message. Never, ever, ever. It's about putting that message forward. So if you can make your drums sound great just with a drum bus, let's say a bit of groove compressor, maybe a maximizer if it's getting a little excitable, maybe some EQ, or a character effect like a ring modulator or whatever. That's unusual, but if you're going that way, go that way. Then if you feel you need to do something, you will note, remember, I had processed each of these individually, so I had layers of compression or what have you, but when I worked on the bit to bring them together, your drum bus is where you turn that kit into a kit. Instead of random sounds being played randomly, you turn it into a kit and a performance. One guy sitting there doing this. If something that you've processed before or built before doesn't sit right, you're either over-processing here or go back and fix it, either at the instrument level or at any processing that you did before. You saw me go back and do that several times, particularly between the kick and the snare, to find that right point in which they all balance together. Putting your bass into a bus with your drums, it's not always the right thing to do. So please don't assume that you should automatically do it. But putting the two together, doing one or two things that bring them together, whether that's EQ, a little bit of saturation, some sort of character effect, although you're less likely to want a character effect where you're putting your drums and bass together, but from time to time you can give them a go, as you saw me give it a go. And then perhaps a very little bit of compression. We do not want a lot of compression there unless you've decided, no, I'm not going to compress my drums, and I'm not going to compress my bass, but I'm going to slam them together. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. You can get into side chaining and stuff, but I think if you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to side chain my drum and bass together, then I'm going to write a piece. I think you're arse about. You're going to write a piece, and then you're in the middle of it, you sort of go, I can make that work better. The song wants me to sidechain those. Great. But you see, I've done no sidechaining. I'm not a fan of it. It's not to say it can't be good, but I absolutely have no interest in sidechaining my kick to my pad sounds. It goes every time the kick drum goes. It actually makes me feel unwell. I'm so overhearing it. So please don't think that that's actually a good statement to make. The rest of this, all just about finding that balance so that it sits nicely. I'm going to give it one more run through. Thank you very much for your time in this and having watched this. If you have questions, please put them in down below. If you find my method and way of presenting interesting, yes, I'm slow. It's deliberate. I take time to explain things. If you find that interesting, please thank me. Don't just hit a like button. Please actually thank me and tell me why it was good. If you don't like it, if you've got a really compelling reason outside of it's too long, because that's your issue. If you've got a compelling reason why you think there's a problem or something you'd like me to address, don't hit a dislike button. That's super uncool. You know, it's like me dropping a turd in your lounge room and not being there to take responsibility for it. You're going to be like, why? So if you have a genuine thing that you want me to look at, put it in the comments. That way your name's on it, I can respond to you. I might be like, sorry, buddy, that ain't my thing, but at least I can look at helping you. If you plain dislike me, you shouldn't be watching this anyway. So yeah, questions, subscribe if you want to see or hear more from me. My plans over the next little while is to focus a little bit more on doing some of my own stuff. I've got a project to finish, the one that I showed you a lot of stuff in the TV themes. I want to get that finished and possibly start another album. So let's have one run through this, and thank you very much.